We're following some very big breaking news tonight, news that will come as a big blow to Donald Trump and his agenda. Tonight, a three-judge panel in New York has effectively balked almost all of Trump's disastrous tariffs. Trump's tariffs against Mexico and Canada, his tariffs against the EU, against China, his tariffs against uninhabited islands with nothing but penguins and snow. They are all blocked by this federal court decision. It comes out of the United States Court of International Trade, which is a specialized court you may or may not have ever heard of, but it deals specifically with trade issues. A three-judge panel consisting of one Reagan appointee, one Obama appointee, and crucially and importantly, one Trump appointee, ruled unanimously that Trump's trade war is essentially illegal, that he does not have the authority to enact these sweeping tariffs on his own. When Trump signed the executive order enacting these tariffs, he cited something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a law that gives the president the authority to use tariffs in times of national emergency. And in their ruling tonight, the judges write, quote, "The question is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act delegates these powers to the president in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country in the world." The court does not read the law to confer such unbounded authority and sets aside the challenged tariffs imposed thereunder. The law does not grant tariff authority to the president simply when he finds or determines that an unusual and extraordinary threat exists. I sense a little snark there. I appreciate it. But man, when you put it that way, it all kind of makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not an expert in international trade law, but Trump's justifications for these tariffs have always been pretty thin, as Chris and I were just talking about. Trump claimed his tariffs on Canada were to stop fentanyl trafficking, even though less than 1% of the fentanyl we seize at the border comes from Canada, less than 1%. Now, for the first time, we have a federal court saying that we all kind of sort of knew to be true already. The president's justification for this trade war is BS. And that is not all. The court tonight also ordered that all of the tariffs Trump has collected so far be vacated. Just how that will work, especially from a White House that doesn't exactly abide by every court order, and what that will all mean, I do not know. This is just breaking this news in the last couple of hours, but I have the right person to ask. Starting us off tonight is Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes, who co-led this lawsuit against Donald Trump's tariffs. Attorney General Mayes, thank you for joining us on such short notice. This all just happened in the last couple of hours, as you well know. Let me just start, because I think we're all trying to digest this, and people at home are wondering what this exactly means. It's our understanding that this ruling applies to all tariffs except for the ones imposed on steel and aluminum. First, is that right? And can you just give us the scope of the impact of this ruling tonight?
Sure. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks for having me. It's a huge day for American consumers, for small businesses all throughout this country who were on the precipice of being absolutely devastated and harmed by these tariffs. And so we are celebrating this. We, like you, are still digesting it. But essentially, you're right. I mean, the Court of International Trade, in a very thoughtful decision, said that essentially all of the tariffs that Donald Trump engaged in under IEEPA, basically the April tariffs, are unlawful. And so they are enjoined. They are essentially enjoined as of tonight, as you and I are speaking. It looks like the Trump administration has made it clear they're going to try to appeal this decision, and they'll probably seek a stay. But for now, this is good news for the people of America.
No question about it. I mean, there's been understandable panic, concern about costs in so many areas of goods that people rely on. I want to get to the legal next steps in a moment, but I just want to ask, I mean, the three-judge panel also ordered that any tariff payments already collected be vacated, which sounds like it means be paid back. Is that what it means? And how exactly would that work?
Yeah, I think we're still sorting through that, so I don't want to be too declarative about that. But yes, essentially, it vacates the tariffs and it enjoins them from going forward. So that's why we're expecting Trump to try to appeal this decision. It'll probably end up at the United States Supreme Court at some point in the very near future.
So just in the last minutes, right before we came on air, the Trump administration did file a notice of appeal, which I'm sure doesn't surprise you, as you were just saying. Yep. It also it's always seemed weird that Donald Trump just had the unilateral power to wake up and decide to put tariffs on every country in the world for whatever reason he decided. I mean, as a layperson, but even with this appeal being filed and with some of their aggressive responses, he's also somebody who doesn't really have a history of complying always with court rulings. So what happens if he doesn't? I know we're just digesting this, but have you thought about that with the others who filed this lawsuit?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And, as you know, the Democratic AGs have sued Donald Trump now, I think, more than 20 times. On a couple of occasions, you're right, he has violated federal court orders. And what we have done is we have gone back into the federal court when that happens, and we have asked for what's called a motion to compel. So I suppose if they try to continue to collect these tariffs and they try to continue the tariff schemes, despite the Court of International Trade's opinion, we would have to go back in for a motion to compel. Let's hope that's not necessary, and let's see what happens next.
We will see. We'll have to keep talking about it with you and your other Democratic AGs. In a statement, they've had a pretty aggressive response to this, is one way to define it. But I think it's so important to untangle all of this, and you're the perfect expert to do that with. In a statement after the ruling, the White House said America's trade deficits constitute a national emergency, and that's up to the president to decide, not judges. I mean, essentially, the court seemed to say the opposite. But what do you say to that?
No, that's right. And so there's a couple things here. Number one, fundamentally, the power to levy tariffs rests with Congress, right? And as you know, nowhere in IEEPA does it even mention the word tariffs. Now, the court in its decision didn't say that the president, whoever the president is, never can levy tariffs under IEEPA. But what the court is saying is the president does not have unbounded authority to levy these tariffs. And that's what this was. I mean, he just sort of woke up one day and decided that he was going to levy tariffs on Canada and China and Mexico and the worldwide tariffs, and declared that this was all based on fentanyl. Well, okay. But then came up with different reasons for it, as you just pointed out. So what are the reasons for it? And if you're going to put tariffs on tomatoes, what does that have to do with fentanyl?
It's a good question, tomatoes and fentanyl. The other way they seem to have responded, Trump advisor Stephen Miller tweeted, "The judicial coup is out of control," which seems to be kind of a predictable knee-jerk reaction to any time a court rules against them. Now, this panel, as I started off the show saying, was unanimous. One of the appointees on the panel was a Trump appointee. But what do you say to that sort of response from the White House?
It's just it's so disappointing, Jen, and it just points to a trend that we are seeing of this administration going after judges, undermining the authority of the judicial branch of government, not respecting the two other branches of government. I mean, again, that's what this case is about. This case is about the president's power vis-a-vis Congress, and now he's disrespecting judges. And he basically makes these sort of very disrespectful and alarming statements every time he loses a case. And that's just not how things are done in our country.
We've already discussed some of this. They've already filed their notice of appeal. You said it could go to the Supreme Court. What's next? I mean, what should we be watching for in the next days and weeks here?
So I think you've kind of laid out some of them, which is, do they seek a stay of this court's decision? We'll watch for that. They have the ability to do that. If this court does not allow for a stay, then we'll have to watch to make sure that the Trump administration does not, as you pointed out, violate its order. And then I would be watching for, how businesses react to this. I think that a lot of small businesses, mid-sized businesses, large businesses are all going to support this. and be absolutely thrilled with it and hope that it sticks, because these tariffs are causing chaos for our consumers. This is a tax. This is a direct tax, Jen, on the people of America. And I think that's why this is such a huge victory and a huge night for our country, because hopefully it's the start of us getting things back on track and preventing this harm.
No question about that. Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes, thank you so much for joining me on such short notice and providing so much helpful information to people watching out there. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
President Trump's second term has been rockier than his first. We are now about 128 days in, and there have been more legally extreme measures out of the White House than blocked in court, more than the first term at this point. Right here, more market volatility, specifically driven by Trump's tariffs, than any other government move driving this kind of volatility in decades. And that up and down, that volatility reflects two problems for Trump. First, widespread rejection of his trade war. And that's been a problem for weeks, which is part of why he's backed off. But second is the growing awareness of the reality that while Trump opens with the strongman approach and vows a tough stand, he then often later backs down under pressure. It's something that China found by standing up to President Trump and hitting back on the tariffs. And that reality undercuts Trump's claimed business persona, the tough negotiator who will always get results. Now, we know some people believe in that. Politically, that's fine. But we're past campaign season. Trump is president, and he's been opening with these giant bids. Some call it maximalism, if you want to get fancy. But people are learning his patterns, where he'll issue a huge demand, create a crisis, but increasingly often he will end up backing down, the Times reports. Quick example we all lived through. Trump hit China with big tariffs. He warned them, quote, "Do not retaliate," as if he could control the response of a foreign nation, which has its own economy, its own issues, its own military, just by tapping that out in all caps from the White House account. It didn't work. As you probably know, China did retaliate. They matched the tariffs. It drove a clash that went up and up, at one point hitting 145% tariffs, which is literally more than double the cost of every item from that country. And everyone knew that wasn't sustainable. In other words, we weren't going to have years with everything costing double. The real impacts began. The U.S. ports began to empty out. Companies started warning the higher prices were coming from Trump tariffs. And then the empty shelves were going to come. And as the weeks went by, before that hit an actual crisis level, Trump backed off most of the key tariffs, and he did it by himself. He blinked because China did not offer real concessions. There was no trade deal, no handshake, no big announcement where both leaders get to say everyone's winning something. No, he just backed down. And business leaders have been facing this in real time. And you know, I always try to level with you. If you're busy living your life, you may not have understandably followed every back and forth trade threat. You might have said, we'll see how high prices get at the Walmart or the bodega, and until then, be busy with life. But the people who trade this stuff and trade stocks, they've been dealing with it daily. And the Times reports, many of those on Wall Street say Trump has clearly been chickening out. They've even coined a phrase, a shorthand, Trump always chickens out, which spells out to the acronym TACO. And this is like real news. This is really something they're saying. And that's coming from Wall Street, which leans right and is a place where negotiating is a big deal. It's a type of skill. They take it seriously. Now, today we saw the president bristles at the TACO term. He said the question, even asking about it, was, quote, nasty. That coming from a politician known for his very tough nicknames and attacks on all kinds of other people, but I guess the word chicken is too much for him today. Now, that's just in the trade war. The battles are measurable there, and the news comes fast. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is how these lessons could apply more broadly, which, it's no exaggeration to say, could affect our free speech and democracy in this country if people learn the right lessons. As Trump's approach backfires and clashes with people and groups who have at least the power and money to fight back, and who choose to fight back, who use their power. Because we can now document over these 120 plus days who is winning. And so Trump has convinced many supporters that he's the boss he played in his fictional television show, which we all remember. It was on our sister channel, NBC, back when he was just doing reality TV. But what's interesting right now is how he is trying to sort of enact that version of reality in the White House, and it is faltering. Posturing a performance, a presidential version of the boss he played in The Apprentice, is how Jonathan Chait writes in The Atlantic. Quote, sitting in a plush leather chair, doling out justice to quavering supplicants. But the evidence suggests a clear pattern, although Trump instructs targets to submit. Doing so merely sets them up for more humiliation and abuse. So Trump demanded China surrender, just as he wanted universities and law firms to surrender to those executive orders, which were unfair and probably illegal, although the day they came down, there wasn't a court ruling on that yet by definition. But I can remind you, the federal government's usually restricted from using its powers to, say, punish dissent and First Amendment protected free speech. And Trump made it more likely he would lose in court because he admitted those were the motivations. He didn't, for example, say, we just are trying to make sure that we regulate law firms. He said, I'm going after firms named X, Y, and Z, Wilmer Hale, because they represented people I don't like. Harvard has power, prestige, and more money than most corporations. They've been winning. They have a $50 billion endowment, so they've been fighting back. They got a federal judge to shut down one of the retaliation plots that would try to ban any new students from abroad from going to Harvard, which seems pretty unfair and now is not happening as long as a judge keeps that frozen. Law firms who fought Trump executive orders have won 3 times just this month already. So that's the power of pushback. But that's not all. You can say, okay, Ari, that's some examples, right? That's examples on one side. Now let's just briefly contrast it to the law firms and the universities that just gave in. Maybe they were trying to avoid Trump's ire. But here's the deal. In the second term, different than the first, he is more blunt and direct. He is unshackled. And he sees their surrender as weakness that invites more abuse. Trump now openly plotting to push those surrender law firms to do even more free work for him and his agenda, even though they already gave in. Columbia is one of the universities that basically gave in earlier, and it's found Trump is not even letting up for a few weeks. New York Times headline there showing this government, with so many things to deal with, is back at Columbia arguing the school is discriminating against Jewish students as it goes after them on Trump's continuing retribution tour. Now, let's be clear. The administration is citing an area, an issue where Trump is referring to a real-world problem. Anti-Semitism is a very ancient hatred that endures. It's a problem in America. It's a problem in many countries. But weaponizing it for partisan politics in a way that has left many experts and Jewish leaders, by the way, opposed to Trump's effort to hijack the concern. That's one of the problems with leaning on a real problem to try to settle scores, because it appears to clearly be, according to the evidence, part of the ongoing retribution crackdowns. Whether that's the law firms that represented his opponents, like I mentioned, or students who simply oppose MAGA and Trump agenda items who happen to go to Columbia. So part of it's about abuse, an administration so extreme that it targets free speech so much that it's already run into walls in court. But the other part here is about something that I bet you know about because you are watching MSNBC, whether you're doing that on live TV or YouTube or however you're hearing my voice. I bet you have an interest in political strategy, which is still how part of the world works. And in politics, you have seasoned veterans that may have some lessons for the novices here. And no disrespect, but we've seen some novices, some rookies give in to Trump, hoping that they could just duck the MAGA politics of America right now, only to find out that's impossible if he wants to come get you. Because some of these MAGA crackdowns are coming for you either way. And surrendering will not make them go away. In the same piece I mentioned, Mr. Chait writes that winning with Trump is impossible because the relationship itself is lose-lose. Attempts to turn a productive connection into an exploitive one create these losses for both sides. That's probably the difference between compromise, which people have to do all the time at work or in life with sometimes disagreeable people or situations. The difference between that and countering an extreme threat for the extreme threat that it is. A former FBI chief who prosecuted the mafia, so he knows that turf, has now compared surrendering to Trump's second-term tactics to surrendering to mob tactics. Veteran FBI Director James Comey, who is now facing yet another Trump-sparked probe, which looks like retaliation, we'll let the courts decide, broke down exactly that comparison here on MSNBC.
They must have never seen a mob movie, because you give the mob a piece of your bar, first thing they do is bring their friends in to drink for free, then they burn it down for the insurance. They will be sorry they made a deal with this administration.
They will be sorry, says a public servant who, whatever you think of his choices, has been found across multiple investigations to be an honest public servant. And he's looked down both roads, even when he had a duty to work for Trump best he could, because he had a 10-year FBI term. He's looked down both roads. And for the groups with the power and the money, the better road, even by self-interest alone, is holding your ground and fighting, says Mr. Comey. And the record shows, so far, that has been more successful. I'll leave this up for a moment. Some of these are logos you may or may not know, but Harvard you know, and the other law firms are the ones who said, we'll fight. So far, they're winning. And others capitulated, from tech bros worried about jail time who are still being hassled to some of those other entities and bankers and groups. Now, I also want to add one more point. This idea of whether you pay lawyers and fight and go for it is not relevant for everyone. There are people who are isolated, people without money to hire a lawyer, let alone a team of lawyers. They're just more in survival mode. But for those big organizations, the big businesses, the rich elites, the law firms I mentioned, for them, the evidence suggests in these first 120 days, fighting back is not just a way to be true to yourselves, the career you've chosen. It also looks like the more victorious strategy.
The statements are true. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. Viewers of this program know we do not just gratuitously platform lies about anyone, but especially judges, or intimidations or threats against them. But today we feel that we must show you that and call out harmful rhetoric when we see it. Donald Trump's vicious and ugly attacks against federal judges, as you saw in that sample of the many, many things he said and posted on social media. People who have been ruling against his actions, not from a partisan standpoint, but because they are illegal and unconstitutional, for the sole reason, in fact, that they believe the things he has sought to do in his first 120 days are unlawful. But tension continues to build. Trump even ratcheted up his attacks in a social media post marking, of all things, Memorial Day, calling out judges who he described as, quote, USA-hating judges who suffer from an ideology that is sick and very dangerous for our country. He then called them, quote, monsters who want our country to go to hell, end quote. These are judges appointed by George W. Bush, Donald Trump, President Clinton, Obama, sorts of presidents from all sorts of parties, calling them, quote, monsters. This personal animosity and anger and the sentiment it is stoking is having immediate, direct, and serious effects on the actual members of the judiciary and their families. New York Times is out with some startling new reporting. Quote, in the 5-month period leading up to March 1st of this year, 80 individual judges have received threats. Then over the next 6 weeks, an additional 162 judges received threats, a dramatic increase. That spike in threats coincided with a flood of harsh rhetoric, often coming from Trump himself, criticizing judges who have ruled against the administration and in some cases calling on Congress to impeach them. To put that sad fact in perspective, the total number of judges threatened this fiscal year, 277, represents roughly 1/3 of the judiciary. The New York Times got these numbers from a face familiar to this program, Judge Esther Salas, who said she obtained them from the U.S. Marshals Service, which is tasked with overseeing security for the judiciary. But at the moment, there are questions about that arrangement. New reporting in the Wall Street Journal finds this, quote, some federal judges are beginning to discuss the idea of managing their own armed security force. The notion came up in a series of closed-door meetings in early March when a group of roughly 50 judges met in Washington for a semi-annual meeting of the Judicial Conference. Security Committee members at the conference worried that Trump could order the marshals to stand down in retaliation for a decision that didn't go his way. The Marshals Service denied that would happen, saying in a statement this, quote, the security of our federal judiciary is a cornerstone of our nation's democracy, and the marshals take that responsibility very seriously. Federal judges make hard decisions based on the rule of law, in large part because the marshals ensure they can make these decisions without fear, intimidation, or retaliation. Yet the idea that judges are even thinking about taking over their security operations and taking oversight of that into their own hands says volumes about where we are in our country right now. It's also where we start the hour with former federal judge Michael Luttig and U.S. District Court Judge for the District of New Jersey, Esther Salas. It's a privilege to be here with both of you at the same time. I think a lot of our coverage is shaped, Esther, by your sharing of what you went through when your son was murdered. I wonder if you can just level set this conversation with a reality check about what is happening right now to your peers in the judiciary.
Well, good evening, Nicole. Always a pleasure to see you, and of course, Judge Luttig. I honestly feel as if it's incumbent upon me as Daniel's mom to talk about the clear and present dangers that exist. I've talked to you on a number of occasions about my concerns with respect to the inflammatory rhetoric. I've talked to you about this concept of a bonfire that is just burning. And instead of us trying to squelch it or tamp it down, we're adding accelerants to it. And I continue to feel that way. But I think the numbers support the concern that I have been expressing. And that is that we are seeing these numbers rise. And, it is irresponsible for people in political power, irresponsible for people with power and large social media platforms to continue to use words that define judges as corrupt or partisan or monsters or leftist, crazy, unconstitutional judges when there's no basis for it, right? And I do believe that, it is necessary for me as Daniel's mom to come out and really speak up for justice, to speak up for the rule of law, to defend the Constitution. I feel it necessary now more than ever when I know what the numbers are saying and I know the risk. I live it every day. Mark lives it every day without our son. Our only child was murdered in our home because of my job. And so for me, as his mother and as an American and as a concerned citizen, I come forward sort of begging, pleading, and asking our political leaders to lead responsibly. To lead responsibly. And that doesn't mean agreeing with judges' rulings. Certainly, as Chief Justice Roberts said, there's always been some tension between the branches of government. There always has been. It's as old as the Republic. But there's a difference between disagreeing with a ruling and appealing it and utilizing the constitutional framework to appeal us to a higher court and making it personal and calling us names and really villainizing us. And I think it is an absolute dangerous road to be going on right now. And I am just praying that for our political leaders and those in power to tone it down. Tone it down. Disagree all you want. But please, don't make it personal, because you're inviting people to do us harm.
Esther, when you saw the message on Monday from the most powerful politician in our country calling judges, quote, monsters, who want the country to, quote, go to hell, did you have any conversations with fellow judges who were scared or worried, or do you have any ongoing conversations with judges who worry about themselves and their families? I guess in most instances, they would worry more about their own children.
No, I've been worried for a long time. I've been worried since we started seeing members of Congress calling for impeachment of judges for doing their jobs. That was something that obviously I worried about. I've been worried about the words rogue judges, rogue judges. I mean, Chief Justice Roberts, he called these illegitimate attacks on the judiciary. He called it out in 2024 in his year-end report. He said 4 illegitimate attacks on the judiciary. Violence, we've seen that, right? We've seen Judge Romer killed by a man he sentenced 15 years earlier in Wisconsin. We've seen Judge Wilkinson gunned down in his driveway in Maryland in October of 2023. So violence, we've seen it. Intimidation, we're seeing it in the form of these pizza doxing that I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about, and how that's being used as psychological warfare against judges. So second was intimidation. Third was the spreading of disinformation. You keep saying over and over again, judges are unconstitutional, judges are rogues, judges are crazy leftist judges, judges are monsters, judges are this, judges are that. You keep saying that over and over again, and after a while, the American public begins to believe that disinformation, and they begin to have and question the justice system. And so that is an illegitimate attack on judges, is the spreading of disinformation. And then finally, even the threatening to not follow lawfully issued orders by the court. These are 4 illegitimate attacks called out by our Chief Justice. And we see it, and we're seeing it in real time. And so for me, I'm here on your show yet again, sort of trying to appeal to people's senses and compassion and, civility and professionalism. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to speak up for justice, to speak up for events like tomorrow's event that we're having at noon, Eastern Standard Time, 9 Pacific. And we're talking about the independence of counsel tomorrow. We're going to keep doing these programs, nonpartisan programs, because we need to speak up for justice. We need to speak up for the rule of law. We need to defend our Constitution. And so, I've been worried for a long time. And, I'm reminded every day when I wake up, and the first thing I think about is my Daniel. And the last thing I think about is my Daniel. So I am obviously very concerned for judges all throughout this country. And I just pray that we can start to get back to a place where we can agree to disagree, where we can have civil discourse, and we can all rally around the fact that we're Americans and we live in the greatest country, in my opinion, the greatest country in the world. That's what I'm hoping for, Nicole. That's what I'm hoping for.
I want to bring in NBC's Ryan Riley. Ken Vogel is a New York Times reporter who wrote that article on Paul Walsack. And Anthony Coley is former director of the DOJ's Office of Public Affairs under President Biden and an MSNBC political analyst. I want to start with the Chrisleys, Ryan. We heard the president say he didn't know them. So how did they end up on his radar?
Yeah, well, that RNC appearance was a big part of this. And then also more recently, there was a Fox News interview that the president's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, did with the daughter as well. And again, comparing them to the Trumps, using this line that she alleged that prosecutors used, that she claims they called them the Trumps of the South, and basically making that direct comparison. And because of Donald Trump's experience in this realm with political cases, cases being brought against him by the federal government, that certainly seems to be an argument he's very eager to sort of take up. We saw it with another case involving a sheriff again this week. It was another person who supported him, who he also he also pardoned. What the government had said during this case is that the Chrisleys spend the money on luxury cars, designer clothes, real estate, and travel, and use fraudulent loans to pay back old ones. After spending all the money, Todd Chrisley filed for bankruptcy and walked away with more than $20 million of those fraudulently obtained loans. The White House said in a statement that the president is always pleased to give well-deserving Americans a second chance, especially those who have been unfairly targeted or overly prosecuted by an unjust justice system. So, now that we have a pardon attorney in place who is also sort of very sympathetic to Donald Trump and has been supportive of the January 6th defendants, for instance, as well as a pardon czar in the White House, that sort of streamlined process involving politically connected individuals, at least, seems to be up and running in terms of churning these cases over very quickly. Chris.
Ryan Riley, thank you. So, Anthony, when the president said that they had been given a pretty harsh treatment based on what I'm hearing, is that how pardons are typically decided, based on what I'm hearing?
No, not at all. I think what we have here, Chris, is we have brazen corruption at the highest level of the Justice Department, of the Trump administration. What's so interesting also as well is that presidential pardons are typically like these get out of jail free cards, right? And what Trump is doing here, he understands the value of these things, and he's not giving them away for free. He wants to benefit in some way politically and legally, and that's what we have in both of these cases. I find it very interesting to me that he announced the pardon of the Chrisleys just hours after Ken Vogel in the New York Times posted this blockbuster story. And I think personally, nobody can get into the mind of Donald Trump, but I think they understood the political liability that Ken's article poses. And I think they were honestly just trying to get ahead of it to divert attention away from these very hard facts in Ken's blockbuster piece.
Anthony, I want to play a little of what the Chrisleys' daughter, Savannah, said on Fox News just 10 days ago.
Originally, they were not going to prosecute because they said it was very weak. They didn't have the evidence that they needed to prosecute, that it wasn't a case. It took 9 years to issue a federal indictment. Both prosecutors were Democrats. They have donated to Democratic candidates. And at trial, we knew it was game over.
We should note that the Chrisleys were convicted by a jury in Georgia after a trial that lasted nearly 3 weeks. That said, they were convicted in 2022. So she's talking about the DOJ that you worked for. So how would you respond to those allegations?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I worked at Main Justice, and this is not even a case that rose to the ranks of the Main Justice Department, certainly not in any type of meeting that I was in, where typically if a case generates headlines, it's flagged for the senior staff of the Justice Department early on in the morning meetings with the Attorney General. Honestly, I'd never heard of this case, and I think what we have here is just people who understand that if they want to get an audience in front of this president, that they just need to echo his language about persecutions, despite what the facts are, despite what the law says. And that's what this is really all about. And Donald Trump understands that, there's some political benefit for him pardoning these social media stars, right? And just hours after he did this was the top trending item on social media, and he just wants to benefit politically from it. And I think this is really what this is all about.
So let's go to the reporter with the blockbuster stories, Ken. In the case of Paul Walzak, you've done a lot of digging on this guy, and he pleaded guilty, we should say. What can you tell us about him and how his mother factored into this pardon?
Yeah, it was really interesting. The pardon application, which came in around the time that Trump was inaugurated, dealt as much with his mother and his mother's political activity as it did with his own crimes and trying to explain them away. As you noted, he did plead guilty, so it's always tricky when you have these folks who are making the claim, as a number of the people who have received pardons and commutations from President Trump in his second term have made, that they were politically prosecuted because of their support for President Trump. Well, you pleaded guilty, and that wasn't really a part of the guilty plea. So it's interesting to see them raise it now when they know, as you alluded to, that it will get traction with Trump. In the case of Elizabeth Fago, who is Paul Walzak's mother, it was pointed out in his pardon application that she had been a major fundraiser for Republicans, including President Trump, raising millions of dollars for the campaigns of these Republicans, hosting at least 3 fundraisers for President Trump. And even more than that, they noted in this pardon application her involvement in a plot to expose the addiction diary of Ashley Biden in the run-up to the 2020 election. That's interesting because that plot actually drew FBI scrutiny, and ultimately 2 people who were involved with it, who actually brought the diary to a fundraiser at Elizabeth Fago's house, pleaded guilty in that case. So nonetheless, they seem to think that flagging this as something that she was involved in would attract attention from President Trump and potentially make the case that they're trying to make here, that they successfully made here, that Paul Walzak was prosecuted because of the political activity and support for Trump from his mother.
Let me ask you a little bit more about what you said about the pardon application, because part of what you wrote is this. It suggested that Donald Trump Jr., as well as Kimberly Guilfoyle and other Trump allies, supported his clemency. They all agreed, according to the application, that the only reason Mr. Walzak was prosecuted criminally was that he was the son of a prominent Trump supporter. Do they have any evidence at all of that?
I mean, there's none that I was aware of that was cited in that pardon application. There is sort of generally this idea that the IRS in particular looks for high-profile people to criminally prosecute to make an example of. And so the argument here would seem to be that he was high-profile, Paul Walzak, because of his mother, not necessarily because of him. It's a bit of an attenuated, maybe even you could say tortured case, but nonetheless, it does really resonate with this argument that Anthony and you have laid out, or this theme that Trump is looking for people to pardon or grant clemency to who are supporters of his, who have made this case that he has made about his own prosecutions, that they were politically motivated. In fact, I'll even throw in one more detail on the Chrisley's pardon application. It actually links their prosecution to prosecutors who have connections to Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney who prosecuted Trump and some of his supporters on the election, the 2020 election interference case. So you see what the buttons are that folks who are seeking pardons think that they need to press to get Trump's attention. And in a lot of these cases, they're right.
You know, Anthony,
Chris, let me jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me jump in here if I can. So an important thing in Kenneth's piece is that, number one, Walzak pleaded guilty. He was not found guilty by a jury of his peers. He was not found guilty because of some actions of some type of radical judge. He pleaded guilty voluntarily. The second thing to remember here is this: this is not a victimless crime. This guy was accused of stealing money, not just from rich lawyers, but from nurses and nursing home aides. These were hourly employees who thought that they were paying money into Social Security so that they could retire with dignity. I mean, this is supposed to be Donald Trump's base. But what we have here is a president, we have a White House who says he's had the government by the people and for the people, but really, he has a government for the rich and the powerful. And that's what both of these pardons prove.
There's something else that strikes me, whether it's a pardon or parole even. One of the key elements has typically been, for a very long time, remorse, right? You have to say, I did something wrong and I'm sorry I did it. We don't see that here. In fact, we see the exact opposite. We see people who say that they are the victims, that the system is being weaponized to use against them. Speak to that change, and if you will, Anthony, what the consequences are for our justice system.
Right, you're exactly right. Typically, when we see pardons, it is because there has been some type of miscarriage of justice, right? Typically, people admit guilt. We don't have that here. We literally have, with Walzak, somebody who pleaded guilty voluntarily to a crime. And so the takeaway from this is that you have a two-tiered system of justice where you have government for the rich and the powerful, for people who have access to money, but not for everyone else. And I mean, it's really a sad state of affairs. But honestly, Chris, I think it is a prelude of what is to come with Donald Trump. I mean, Ryan Riley has reported, among others, in the DOJ press corps about the decimation of the public integrity section within the criminal division of the Justice Department. Two of those attorneys prosecuted Walzak. When I was there were more than 30 lawyers within the career staff of the public integrity section. Now, according to the Washington Post, there are less than 5. And then there are reports that a key policy that requires U.S. attorneys across the country to check and many times get approval from the career staffers before approving public corruption cases, that they won't even be able to do that if this policy change comes through. So it's a sad state of affairs in our nation's justice system.